Hello everyone, welcome back to our next web lecture for Fundamentals of Communication. During our last session, we talked about the overall speech delivery. We are going to kind of pick up where we left off, and we are going to talk about anxiety. As I'm sure many of you understand the feeling of anxiety, especially when it comes to public speaking. But what we are going to talk about today is some of the ways and techniques of how you can potentially overcome the feelings of anxiety. It is actually quite normal to have feelings of anxiety or different feelings of apprehension, hesitancy when it comes to giving a speech. For some of you, it could be a little bit easier in the web environment because you do have the opportunity to record your speech as many times as you need. Whereas if you are in a classroom or you are in a face-to-face setting, you don't get that option. There are no do-overs. What you say, you can't erase. But on a video, you can definitely do that. Everyone is different, right? We all come from different backgrounds, different walks of life. We all have different ways of learning, and what works for one person may not necessarily work for another one. So we are going to go over various types of anxiety, different types of communication apprehension, and then we will also discuss some potential ways that you can uncover and unlock your anxiety feelings and hopefully release those feelings of anxiety and be able to give your speech or communicate freely without actually having those feelings. Whenever we go over these things, keep in mind everyone is different. I will share some different techniques and different things that you could potentially use, but you may want to use all of them, but feel free to create your own formula. There's not one formula that's going to work for everyone. So just use what we go over as inspiration to create your own system as to what is going to work best for you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with communication apprehension. Apprehension is essentially just another word for anxiety. The communication apprehension is similar to anxiety, but it's just your hesitancy to communicate, your hesitancy to speak up. Whenever you have communication apprehension, that could go for any type of communication. We communicate whenever we deliver a speech. We communicate whenever you are in a one-on-one conversation. If you are talking to a partner of romantic interest, if you are talking to a friend, all of the things that we do whenever we interact is communication. If you raise your hand in the classroom because you have a question, that is a form of communication. If you are at work and you are having a team meeting and there's 30 people at a boardroom, at a board table, and you think about, do I want to ask a question? I feel like I could contribute to the conversation, but I'm kind of nervous to do so. I'm sure at some point, everyone has experienced something with the communication apprehension, and everyone is different. So some people may be confident in some areas, whereas some people may not be confident anywhere. You could be confident to give a speech, but you may be nervous to speak up in the classroom or in the workplace. So you just kind of have to think about where you need to improve. And it kind of goes back to the intrapersonal communication, which is communication with yourself. Think about what you need to do and identify your strengths and your weaknesses so that you can work to improve those areas. Whenever you have any type of communication apprehension, then that leads to those feelings of anxiety. And if you don't work through those feelings and process them, it's only going to build and it will just continue to get worse. The number one cause of poor speech delivery is going to be anxiety. Because if you are anxious and you're nervous, you may even find yourself doing things that you don't realize. Whenever, so I teach this class also on campus, and sometimes people do things and they say they don't even realize they're doing. I've seen students that'll lean up against the board, or they'll, start to play with their hair, or maybe they have a necklace on. There's all kinds of things, and everyone is different. Sometimes people know they do it, but it's just a nervous habit. But just think about where you need to improve. Whatever you do for your speech, it's possible that you may have anxiety the night before. Sometimes people get super nervous the night before, they don't sleep at all, and then the next day they're just like on edge because they can't focus. But other people may be totally fine. They're like, I can handle this. I got this. I'm going to ace this speech. But then whenever they get up in front of an audience, it's overwhelming because they're like, oh, this is a little bit different. All eyes are on me. So just kind of think about, even make a list if you want, like things that you feel like you do well with, or things that you feel like you need some attention. Some people also are extremely confident whenever it comes to talking in front of an audience, but whenever it goes to like one-on-one conversations, whether that's, your partner or something that's a more, a more in-depth conversation, sometimes that makes people a little bit nervous. So again, just think about what works best for you and where you need to work on. Moving on from communication apprehension, we will talk about trait apprehension. Trait apprehension is anxiety in a variety of different settings. It could be under certain circumstances, but the trait apprehension kind of comes on into play with you in the particular position. So let's just say that someone is extremely confident about their job, but their boss asked them to create maybe an action plan for another employee, but they've never created an action plan before. Or maybe they get a promotion and they didn't apply for the promotion, but their supervisor encouraged them to apply. That could create trait apprehension because they don't feel that they have the qualities or the traits. It could create imposter syndrome, if you will, to let them show up, because even though they really do have the skills, they just don't believe in themselves and they don't think that they have the traits. Then there is state apprehension. The state apprehension could be, for example, I have a student in one of my classes and she is an HR manager. She has to do different presentations for orientation, like with new hires and all kinds of things. And, she also does presentations to corporate executives. She actually got promoted. She actually shared this story with the class, but she had gotten promoted and they switched her to a totally different department, but she was still in charge of doing the new hire orientation and things like that. And then she would have to do weekly presentations to different corporate executives. It was still the same content, still the same information, but she openly talked about how she found herself having feelings of discomfort because she was in front of a new audience. It was the same thing, and she was comfortable before, but now that she is around different people, then she kind of has those feelings of apprehension now. So your environment can also dictate how you feel, and your environment can, if you're uncomfortable, it can make you have more anxiety. One story that I like to tell, as I mentioned, I am the vice president of education for the West Knoxville Toastmasters chapter. And whenever the president is out for whatever reason, the president, sometimes him and his family, they go camping. But if he is out, I will have to fill in. Well, there was one particular instance, this was probably 2 years ago, but it was an evening when I had to fill in. We meet at a church and we meet once a week. Sometimes there are people that are members of the congregation of the church, and I think they do a women's Bible study, or sometimes they have evening potlucks. There's just different things going on. Well, I'd asked the president if I needed the key, because we also have a key to open the church if necessary. And he was like, no, you're totally fine. They are going to be there. The door is going to be unlocked. No big deal. I said, okay. Well, the next day, whenever I got there, the door was locked. And I did not have a key. We actually had a ton of guests that evening. I think we had 26, 27 people. And we're just all hanging outside of the church. And since it was my responsibility to lead everyone that was there, I had to figure it out. I had to think quick. I had to think on my feet. And the more that things go wrong in that moment, like if you lose your note cards, or maybe you accidentally deleted your PowerPoint an hour before your speech, the more, hopefully nothing goes wrong for you guys, at least not that extreme, but no one's perfect. We are imperfect humans. There is not a single perfect person on this earth. So whenever you make mistakes, the more that you make those mistakes, the more that you can bounce back from those. And it's like a muscle. You exercise it, and the more that things go wrong and then you can improvise and adapt, the more that it'll work in your favor to become a better communicator, to become a better leader, because all of those things are helping you grow. And I like to share this story because if someone who was perhaps a new leader, or they had not had much leadership experience, it could make someone nervous. If things go wrong, it kind of throws you off your game. You have this big plan for how things are going to be, and then something happens and you have to adapt your plan. You don't always have time to think about it. So in this particular instance, I had to think fast. There was a park that I would sometimes run down the road. They had a greenway, and I would go there to run. And I knew that they had a gazebo because I had passed it during some of my runs. And it was luckily a beautiful day. It was sunny. It was in the middle of July. And I asked them, hey, do you guys care if we just drive down to this park? So everybody was on board, thankfully. If someone had disagreed, I may have had to come up with a different plan. But it was only just a few blocks. But we all got in our cars and everybody followed me, and then we got to the gazebo, and then we just had Toastmasters in the park. Now, this also created an additional layer, even for experienced Toastmasters, for our normal members, because we were being watched. It was in the summer, it was hot, it was crowded, it was packed. And all these people are like, what are these people doing? We had a huge group, and, we're getting up one by one. Everyone's giving speeches just in the middle of a park. And we started to get an audience. All these people are watching us, and people start surrounding us and listening. And some people were a little intimidated, but I'm just like, okay, guys, we got to keep going. Let's just move forward with the meeting. And we did. But it was good because it got everyone out of their comfort zone in a level that we normally don't have. So the more that things go on, the more that you can embrace it. So it does seem a little tough at first. But there are, of course, for one, it's going to take time. Everything that we go over, and I know I've said this before, but please don't put pressure on yourself to feel like you have to become a master public speaker overnight. It does take time. Sometimes it takes years of practice to be able to master that. But we are going to go ahead and talk about a few of the ways that you can overcome that fear of public speaking. So there are 3 different ways. The first one is called systematic desensitization. The second one is called cognitive restructuring. And then the third one is called skills training. Now, again, all 3 of these are just a very generalized concept. you can create your own system. Be creative. So you may need one of these ways, or you may need all of them, or you may take a little bit from each one and just create your own formula. There is no right or wrong way. You know yourself best, and no one knows what you need ultimately except for you. So you kind of have to figure out, how can I overcome these feelings of anxiety that I have? So we'll get started with the first one, which is the systematic desensitization. And basically what this means is that you are slowly, gradually increasing your level of anxiety, and then you kind of get warmed up to it a little bit. For example, let's just say that you have your speech prepared, you're ready to start practicing and rehearsing, and then you are alone in your bedroom, you say it a few times, maybe you practice 10 times, you're like, okay, I got this, I feel good about this. But then you're like, okay, let's bring my dog in here, let's bring my cat in here, and then your mom and your dad and your sister and your neighbor, and then you slowly bring people in. Whereas if you had not practiced on your own and you just decided you were going to present in front of 30 people, even if you knew everybody, you are going to have more anxiety, whereas if you slowly build yourself up. So basically, you start out slow, get comfortable with that level, and then after that, you move on and bring in a little bit more. So you slowly introduce yourself to more levels of anxiety, and then you eventually get comfortable with it. And I may have said this before, but after I finished my master's degree, I had started my own business. I have my own marketing company. I would go to local networking events. They were business networking groups, and that's how I would get my clients. Whenever I first started those groups, I had no idea what I was doing. Someone invited me to a business networking group, and at that point in time, I had no idea what one was. I did not know what you were supposed to do. But I showed up anyway. I felt uncomfortable. I had no idea how to just basically, at a business networking group, they have kind of a structured system. You have your business card, and then you go and introduce it to people, and then you meet people, and then you just share and you see how you can help each other. But I had no idea what I was doing, but I kept going back, and I eventually became an ambassador for one of the groups. And I started going to all kinds of groups. I actually had gotten a job as a marketing coordinator, a sales and marketing coordinator. And then part of my job was to go to those networking groups, because part of my skill set was relationship building, and I had to apply that to my position. But anytime you're doing anything new, it takes time for you to adjust and feel good with it. So just gradually exposing yourself to more anxiety. So that's the first way. That is called systematic desensitization. The next one is called cognitive restructuring. Now, cognitive restructuring is kind of like what it sounds. You have to restructure your mind, restructure your thought process. And you think about a couple examples I like to give is for my on-campus classes, I've had students in the past who were either possibly in the military or in a chorus or a choir. And if someone is in the military or in their, a singer, an artist, or in the choir, I do know that individuals in a choir or some in the military, they have to stand at attention. I've had students in the past talk about they were in a choir either for school or church or just something along those lines, and they weren't allowed to move around. They had to stay still, and they are accustomed to being in front of an audience, and they've done that, perhaps for years. So it gets programmed in you. Even though you're in a different setting and you're in a different environment and you're giving a presentation now, if you're accustomed to being in front of an audience, it may be easy to just show up as you would as if you're in front of the other audience for the military or, for being in chorus or choir. So you may have to cognitively restructure your body language to be like, okay, hey, I'm not in front of the audience at my church or an audience for the chorus. I'm doing something completely different. So you have to learn a new skill. And again, that takes time. But it's also not just body language, it is also your emotions. If you do have anxiety, you have to kind of tell yourself, give yourself a pep talk. Some people have a really low level of anxiety, or in the middle, or a high level. Again, everybody's different. So some people are going to be like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can give this speech. I'm going to throw up. I'm going to die. I cannot do this. You absolutely can do this, but you have to train your mind. Your mind is much more powerful than you think. Think about it. What is the worst thing that is going to happen? Okay, if I give this speech, even if people laugh at me, which they won't, you guys all feel the same, or they hopefully they don't. If somebody does, then we're having a totally different conversation. But even if something horrible happens, you lose your notes, you forget your PowerPoint, or even if you freeze up and totally draw a blank and you don't know what to do, it's still not the end of the world. You're still going to make it to after the speech. You're still going to be okay, and it's going to be over before you know it. So there's different things that you may have to work on self-talk and work about talking about with yourself with the cognitive restructuring, but you just want to kind of keep in mind that whatever you need to do is for you, and there's no right or wrong way. All right, so the last one is going to be skills training. The skills training, this is I guess, rather broad way to overcome anxiety, because again, everyone is different. What skills that you need to work on may be totally different than what the person over here needs to work on. You could have to work on your tone. Maybe you maintain the same tone throughout your speech, or maybe you have a really quiet voice and you need to learn to speak louder, or maybe you stay in the same spot, or you look down, you don't look at your audience, you have poor body language. All of those things, everything is going to be different. But whatever the skills training is for you, that is what you would have to research. That is what you would have to practice. You could look up different ways to improve your eye contact, how to not be nervous during a speech, to look at the audience. So there's all kinds of things, and again, you just have to see what's best for you, and then you figure out what skills you need to acquire, and then you work on those skills over a period of time to work on improving those. So you may also consider making a list of things that you feel like you do well, and then also a list of things that you feel like you don't do well, of where you need to improve. But that kind of wraps it up with the 3 things, and you can, like I said, just kind of take in a little bit from each area, or maybe one ultimately stands out to you, or even just create your own formula. Whatever you need to do to feel more comfortable overcoming the anxiety and more comfortable in front of an audience, that is going to be the best thing, whatever you need for yourself. So that kind of wraps it up today, what we're going to talk about for overcoming anxiety. If you have any questions or concerns about that or something else, please feel free to reach out. I am more than happy to assist. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.